It's Chazi.
A strange
Ah, don't yell at me. I'm sensitive. So I saw the title of this video and I thought this video could be a fairly important conversation. Specifically, what is midcore content? And there's a lot of debate around it, like how close it is to casual, how close it is specifically to hardcore, or sorry, not hardcore, but specifically high-end content. Hardcore is a different kind of thing. So it's I feel like maybe Kaetsu has some good videos, and I feel like this is also a very important conversation to add. So I'm curious what he has to say.
A strangely common complaint about Final Fantasy XIV is that it doesn't have any mid-core content, sometimes referred to as medium core, but the meaning is the same. There can be many different reasons for this complaint, the most common obviously being, well, that's because there is no mid-core content. But I would propose that might not quite be what is happening. However, there are many possible reasons for that. The first reason is that whenever this conversation about mid-core content starts, a detail that is often forgotten is that a game being casual, mid-core or hardcore is typically more about the general, overarching style of the game and the gaming mindset, and
He is not wrong in terms of that it's specifically very much about the mindset. I agree with him on that regard. That I've seen casual players who would enjoy harder content a bit more than something more simple, right? I've seen that. Just because their day-to-day life for some reason requires them to be fucking gigabrain and every single thought in their head is in 4K, right? But I do agree on this regard. So some casual players will specifically think that even casual content in this game is too hard. And it's there's nothing wrong with that, but holy fuck. Are our standards low if casual content in this game is hard for somebody?
much less about the actual difficulty of the game, although some games recently have started to use casual in place of the easy difficulty. As far as I know, many games land in neither the casual or hardcore baskets, but are also not referred to as midcore as a result. And let's not forget that Final Fantasy XIV has many difficulties, they're just labeled differently. We have the...
Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of midcore content. That's why the specific differentiation in 14 is always so blurry, because we don't have enough midcore content to specifically figure out if it's closer to high-end or to casual.
The regular content, the unreal content, the extreme content, the savage content, the ultimate content, and somewhere in between all those we have
Actually, a good point. Unreal content can technically be casual right now. It used to be difficult in those days when it was current content, but right now, I feel like it's actually can be considered casual, if not mid-core, right? I don't know, but essentially it is a matter of perspective, and that specific perspective is fine, and arguably the most correct one, but, you know.
unique challenges like Valdesian Arsenal, Delubrum Regine Savage, Criterion Savage, Deep Dungeons and soloing those, and so on and so forth. Boja, Eureka, you name it. Certainly, surely, there is a little something for everyone. By that token, a casual gamer is likely to only play maybe a few hours a week, something like that, if even that. They log in a bit spontaneously and may simply not have the time or...
Just to clarify one thing in advance, Criterion and Criterion Savage essentially is the same difficulty, just Criterion Savage is just a bit harder and a bit more punishable, but it's essentially the same thing. So I would consider both of them essentially more or less in the same category. Actually, I'm trying to it's on on the tip of my tongue. It's I'm trying to remember what was it even called, the normal difficulty of that content, because Criterion was already, I don't remember actually, but I remember there was the Savage content was essentially just an annoying difficulty, and Criterion was the higher difficulty.
or interest to get deeper than the main story, or other tasks that can easily be started and finished within the hour. That is at least the case in the most extreme description. A hardcore gamer is, in its most extreme degree, commonly seen as being well, entirely on the opposite end of that previous description. To the degree that if there is a challenge to be overcome, the hardcore gamer might find a few hours a day to not be fighting this challenge. Doing things like, oh, I don't know, sleeping and eating. Of course, many hardcore gamers.
You think gamers eat or sleep? Goddamn, dude, the expectations here. I'm pretty sure most 14 players got like scurvy because their diet consists of ramen noodles and coffee. Our expectations are very high, apparently. But I can see where he's going with this, especially like a time dedicated to a type of content is also a factor in terms of like what kind of difficulty it can be or what it even is. I kind of agree with him on that.
Gamers are not quite that wild, but are much, much more dedicated to the game than the casual gamer. The problem there is that given that both the casual gamer and the hardcore gamer is a sliding scale and covers quite a large spectrum, the midcore gamer, I guess.
Variant is normal for Criterion. Thank you. It was I wanted to say Valorant, but I also knew that that would prove that I have brain damage. I was not ready to admit that. But thank you. That you are correct. It is called Variant.
Is often more likely to be a player that leans more towards casual, but doesn't view themselves as that.
We sustain ourselves off of cat girls. Like, jokes aside, let's be honest. Like, as much as we all meme, there's like plenty of videos about bunny girls and cat girls being one of the good features of this game. Let's be fucking honest. The good-looking cat girls and bunny girls of this game definitely attracted a certain a good chunk of the percentage of the player base. Like, let's not kid ourselves. Not everyone plays for playing. Like, glamour is part of the game, and some people definitely came in, bought the game, the expansion, are paying monthly sub just to look at very, very cute bunny girls. Like, if I wasn't a raider, chances are my gooting reasons would be that I would like sub to this game specifically to look at cat girls and bunny girls and aura girls and all the girls and Highlander girls and Rogadin girls, all the girls. Gimme. Hrothgar girls, a bit too hairy for me, but I'll look at them. They do look cute. They do look kind of thick. Love that shit. Gimme.
Or leans more towards hardcore, but doesn't view themselves as that. Often, I guess it is.
You know what? Boys as well. Give me that shit as well. Cute boys as well. You know what? Give me all the good-looking characters. Now that I think about it, other than male Elezen, I kind of find every other... Actually, Lullafils and male Elezens. Those are the exception. Every other race, I find gig attractive. I think you are valid, unless you have a long giraffe neck for a fucking male Elezen. Get the fuck out of my face.
It's a lot easier to determine whether someone is or is not a hardcore gamer by inspecting how they approach the game, and I would argue that the vast majority of people that define themselves as gamers are quote-unquote midcore gamers. And by that token, does that perhaps mean that
I don't agree. I think just gamer is casual gamer. Casual gamer, just gamer, those are the people that just play the game for the story, for the whatever base experience the game is offering you. I think those are, the just gamer difficulty. I don't believe it's midcore. Midcore, I believe, are people who are in it for the experience, but also want at least a certain level of challenge. Like, at least some level of challenge. Those are the people that would replay a single-player game on higher difficulty or something along those lines. But like just gamer, it's like people who play mobile games, people who played Nokia phone Snake high score leaderboards. They're just gamers. They just play Snake while they were on the bus heading to work. They're just gamers because they do enjoy the recreational activity of playing video games, whatever the format is.
a midcore gamer is just a gamer, and by extension, the content they want is just content. Not particularly easy, not especially hard, but just content. And that is where we stumble into another problem with this kind of definition, because difficulty is subjective. Yes, sure, if you compare two different tasks, you can probably determine which one is harder and which one is easier. But which one...
Sometimes people compare me to Dark Souls, because I am also unreasonably hard. I'm sorry. Please don't leave mean comments under my videos. I'm sorry.
Is harder can also be subjective. Writing your name with a pencil is probably quite easy for you, but it might be a lot harder for someone that is used to a different alphabet than yours, or someone that might not normally do handwriting at all. On the other hand, maybe they are really good at writing their name with their alphabet with a mouse, and you might find that pretty hard. This is something a lot of people tend to forget, and it often goes into the bucket of, if it is easy for me, it should be easy for everyone. That's a slight exaggeration, but it does come up surprisingly often. Normally, I would have said that the hardest content in Final Fantasy XIV usually somehow is immune to this kind of definition, but I do feel that more and more frequently, more and more players will say content that is generally considered hard is actually easy, especially once they have beaten it themselves.
And that's true. Well, not exactly, but from a certain perspective, it is true. That is something I've said in multiple videos before. If you are doing Savage, you should do Ultimate. Like, you don't have to clear it. You don't have to commit to it. You don't have to be an Ultimate gamer. But it's like, you clear an Ultimate, clear Phase 1 and Phase 2 of any Ultimate. Do it. You will go back into Savage and you will feel a bit silly about certain mechanics and how you felt they were difficult in comparison to anything else on the map. Right? Because, like, unfortunately, because of how some of, like, I kid you not, after clearing DSR, even the current Savage tier seemed a bit silly to me. Some mechanics, like fucking Sunrise, are annoying. But with every Ultimate I clear, my perspective on Savage shifts. Same with, like, Savage itself. It's like, once you clear it enough time, like, if you do anything enough time, anything becomes easy, right? But in a sense, he is correct, but in a sense, he's not. But yeah.
And if all content you can beat is easy, and by extension...
Also keep in mind, this game is also kind of easy, because it technically is meant for babies. Babies who watch anime. And say cool things like goo goo gaga, mama give me my bink. As much as I make fun of some of these things, this game is very approachable in terms of skill level and skill sets. Like, it is not hard to be good at this game. It is not. Like, this comes from someone who has gone through the path of, like, rejecting the idea that skill level can only be achieved through years of experience. I thought like that before, but then when I actually put the effort into specifically improving, working on my foundation in raiding, it's like I figured out that raiding is actually kind of fucking easy. with the correct mindset and just a bit of time put into specifically focusing on your personal improvement as a raider, it kind of gets very easy to become a better raider and be within the realms of having the skill set ready for high end or hard, not hardcore, but like semi-hardcore. I don't mean like you have to go week 1 or go hardcore, but like you will have a skill level that is ready for that. Performing, not specifically blind prog week 1 sort of shit, but you can be close to it very quickly and very easily.
Not really hardcore, and all content you haven't beaten is very hard, and by extension, definitely not casual, then what's left? For the sake of brevity, throughout this discussion, I will be discussing difficulties referring to casual, midcore, and hardcore as difficulties, regardless of what we understand them as. The second reason, or at least possible reason, is that perhaps most of the content in Final Fantasy XIV is quote-unquote midcore. It requires you to think beyond purely just mash buttons, and ignoring boss mechanics can get you killed, even in the so-called casual content. It just so happens that the game is flexible enough that...
I can see his point. It's not. I don't necessarily agree with it because we have so many mechanics that are literally meant. Like, there's so few mechanics that will literally wipe you if you fuck up. Well, there's a lot of them, but there's a reason the majority of the mechanics or the majority of punishments in raids is specifically damage downs and damage and vuln stacks or weakness. If you mess up, you are weaker. You do less damage. You take more damage. You have less main stat. you will perform worse, right? That is like the majority of punishments in the game. Obviously, there's also death. And wiping the mechanic and, you know. But there's a reason we have so many memes about damage downs and vuln stacks, etc. It's like all the debuffs. It's like, that is the main way of punishing the player in this game for messing up the mechanics. Obviously, it's like we all can get very angry at body checks, but the reason we're angry at body checks is because the game conditioned us for so many expansions to specifically respect the debuffs, but not the body checks. We would look like we're used to specifically a concept where if you mess up, your entire team doesn't exactly fucking die because of your fucking mistakes. You get a debuff as punishment, personal punishment, like kind of thing. Meanwhile, like in Fru, there's a new fucking concept. Is one of the people that's supposed to be doing the mechanic with you is not present and doesn't do the mechanic with you, it doesn't matter if the mechanic is survivable. Chances are it probably is at the right conditions. But everyone who is in that mechanic is getting a damage down. Anyone who didn't soak that party stack that's supposed to be stacked specifically soaked by 4 people and not 3, you're getting a 90% damage down. 90 fucking percent for 2 minutes. That is a huge amount of damage, like, punished on your side. That is a huge amount of potency just taken away from you for messing up that mistake. Like, it's not just from you. It punishes your entire group that are supposed to be responsible with you for resolving that mechanic.
Your fellow player can cover your mistakes in what we consider the casual content of the game. A bit like how in Souls-like games you can often call in a helper, sometimes that is another player, to assist you in pushing forward. But in Final Fantasy XIV, this is how the game is meant to be played. The key is that the game...
Yeah, don't be angry at me. I don't call on other players in Elden Ring, but I use summons. But, I don't use summons because I think I cannot clear the fight without them. I call on summons because I know it annoys people. I have done fights without summons, but sometimes I will just annoy people. Like, I will have 11 vitality build wizard who is just doing nothing but spams rock sling. I will get like one of those crystal puppets that just block all the brunt of the damage and spells in front of me, and I will just spam rock sling. There's better builds, there's better sets, I know, there's better spells and everything. But I know it annoys the fuck out of some people. And that's what gives me vitality and energy and the drive to play these games. But that's me.
Game offers a lot of content that absolutely can be considered casual too. And the content the casual player is most likely to engage with is the content that is mandatory for progression and does not require you to put...
Normal raid is not mandatory for progression. Who the fuck are we kidding? Normal raids... it's mandatory to progress through the story. It's not mandatory to progress through, you know, difficulties or raid tiers. Like, that is the casual. That is essentially could be even considered midcore content for a while. But I'm not sure. Like, I feel like progression should play a part in this discussion, but I don't believe it's that like big of a aspect to this than he makes it out to be. Although, to be fair, he might specifically just mention it per passing. But at least in my opinion, it's like just having a progression is not a valid point of specifically difficulty. Difficulty might have a requirement for certain progression, item levels, unlocks through quests, etc. But I don't think it's part of the difficulty just because there is progression.
put together a dedicated group to do it. It is beatable with 3 to 7 to 23 random strangers. But that said, it could be argued that what we consider casual content in Final Fantasy XIV is not really casual, it is simply the easiest or easier content in the game, and so, by comparison, must be the casual part of it. The third reason circles a bit back to the if I can beat it, it is easy, if I can't beat it, it is hard kind of argument from the first reason. Each individual player has some personal definition of what category each piece of content lands in, and sometimes they have a more defined description of how they put content in their categories. One example I heard somewhat recently when asking for a definition of midcore was content where you expect to wipe, but is beatable in a single session. For this definition, the Dawn Trail Extremes can be mid-core or not, depending entirely on what players you have in your team. Similarly, I am sure when a definition like this is presented, Savage is typically considered beyond mid-core. But I have heard...
Hold on, let me actually listen to that properly.
One example I heard somewhat recently when asking for a definition of mid-core was content where you expect to wipe, but is beatable in a single session. For this definition, the Dawn Trail Extremes...
You're expected to wipe, but is beatable within a single session, roughly 2 hours. I feel like, yeah, that could be it. Like, if enough people spend enough time, like, doing a fight for 2 hours, I feel like that would essentially cover extremes. Probably not Criterion, but extremes definitely. Some Savage fights, probably 1 and 2. In some tiers, probably even 3. Yeah. I can see that being a good definition for midcore.
Can be mid-core or not, depending entirely on what players you have in your team. Similarly, I am sure when a definition like this is presented, Savage is typically considered beyond mid-core. But I have heard stories of players starting on and beating M1S in a single session. Similarly,
not just M1S, M2S, and possibly M3S, depending how prepared you are. If you're going in blind, that's a different level of difficulty. But if you're going in with information and guides, like my group cleared M1S in 1 session. 1 session, like specifically 1 lockout. We cleared it. M2S, Tukas, probably a couple of days. Some of the mechanics are a bit too hectic in the fight, but we did clear it, I believe, in 2 days. We essentially got midway through M3S on our first week as a static, and we're mid-core, and we had just 3. We had 3 raid days, so honestly, that was pretty good. But I think like Savage needs to be considered in a way that actually, I don't know, how would you consider a Savage? Like, Savage will always have the easiest fight on 1 and 2.
there are probably way more players that cannot beat the newest Extreme Duty in a single session than players that can. So I would suggest that is beatable in a single session is either too vague or doesn't apply if there are more players that can't than players that can. Besides, by that same token, most casual content could be defined as content where you assume you won't wipe and will be beaten in a single session, right?
I mean, like, if we're looking for these like specific terms how to describe difficulties, easy content would be where people would need to put effort into wiping. Like some normal fights, like for example E6, that was something that could be considered mid-core, because some people were having a lot of fucking trouble with that. You could sometimes it would actually take you more than like 3-4 pulls. I remember that that content. Some people were having trouble seeing the aerial attack from Garuda because they could not turn their fucking camera apparently. But some of the other fights were very easy. I feel like normal raid could be considered casual content because you literally need to put a lot of effort into wiping. Raid-wise don't do enough damage. The debuffs aren't that punishable. The percentage of them is just not that big. Two healers are capable of just rezzing enough people to the point that the fight is cleared. If the fight can be soloed by a tank, let's say a warrior or a paladin, like if a tank does not require your fucking healing help, it's casual. It is casual.
Right? But there are groups that wipe in casual content, and there exist sessions that don't succeed. They're rare, but they exist. So that definition may have to move too.
But to be fair, like they may or may not. That's just a statistical inconsistency at that point. May or may not doesn't like matter, because we should be determining by averages. Average, like averages will determine how many people can and cannot clear a certain type of content in a certain type of way. Whether we like it or not, some people might say like, oh no, there's a lot more hardcore raiders than casual. Fuck no, we did the math in one of the videos. It's like our numbers on average are very fucking small in comparison to the to some of the other content enjoyers in the game. High-end raiders on average, there's like, and I'm counting specifically the light data center, right? Light data center, there's a roughly average of 2,400 active hind raiders in Party Finder. Active on average, right? That number is so fucking small in comparison to people who just roleplay. Entire clubs filled with like fucking 80 people. That's fucking nothing. And that's just one clubhouse. Role players, crafters, people who do literally anything else but raiding. Maybe some people enjoy the deep dungeons. That's not exactly raiding. That can be considered even casual content to some, depending how actively you want to do it. But yeah, it's like, I believe we should be looking not just like whether or not there's like an ultimate kind of stance on something. We should also look at specifically averages. Average will definitely decide something like this.
Too. And by the time we reach a reasonable definition, it starts to sound possibly a bit more like content where it is possible you will wipe, and it is likely you will beat it in a single session. And by that point, Midcore has so much in common with the casual definition that it can be hard to even tell the difference. The certainty of failure and the certainty of success.
Like, all instances can be wiped, but all content is designed to be killed. Like, we're kind of arguing a lot of like semantics here. It's just, it does depend on how much the content is resisting to be killed. But I feel like this is, I don't know, we're giving too much thought into this. It's not as deep as you would think. Even if as fluid and as much as like perspective is, sorry, subjective and perspective are involved in this kind of conversation, I feel like we're giving this a bit too much fucking thought.
Being so similar, but not quite the same. Another example is that to some players...
Then again, I kind of don't care enough about these things because I just do all content in general. Maybe not crafting. I wish I could get more into crafting. I generally do, but like any other content, I probably do it very actively. I do it very, very actively.
Is content that requires you to make a group beforehand to be successful is considered hardcore, and by extension, everything else is not hardcore. Or conversely, all content that can be reliably beaten through the random duty finder is casual content, and everything else is not casual content, although often simply called hardcore content because it sounds a bit sexier than not casual. For a little bit of math kai here, let's say that casual content is the set called C, alright? And let's say the hardcore content is the set called H, okay? Well, by the two prior definitions, for C, H would be the complement of C, which is everything that is not C. Similarly, for H, C would be the complement of H, meaning everything that is not H. In both cases, casual and hardcore content combined cover all content. There is no in between. However, what lands in the casual box and what lands in the hardcore box can vary from player to player. For example, some players would, by the above definitions, even put A Realm Reborn extremes in the hardcore bucket because thou shalt not queue for extremes. However, some players will queue anyway, and succeed anyway, which means that a strange middle ground in these definitions appear, namely, content you are quote-unquote meant to make a group for beforehand, but is perfectly
I feel like whether or not you need to make a group beforehand is just kind of like the weird aspect. I kind of see where he's coming from with this, like whether or not you should be clearing this in Party Finder or in the static, but that's just like, it's unrelated skill. It's whether or not you're capable or, you know, some people are scared of going into Party Finder. Understandable. Nothing wrong with that. But I don't believe like your social, like the way you socially are approachable in a video game is, or whether or not you're willing to be in a room with a bunch of strangers is somehow gonna define your level of skill or what kind of content is more appropriate to you. I kind of don't think, honestly.
beatable with the duty finder. Is that midcore then? Is the midcore content to do hard content without doing the hardcore quote-unquote style of preparation? That sounds strange to me, certainly. It sounds like midcore is doing potentially casual content in a harder way than necessary to amplify the difficulty of the content. Couldn't you do that with everything? Hypothetically. The fourth reason is that it seems a bit like any content that reasonably could be defined as midcore is defined as either casual or hardcore, depending entirely on who is doing it. Or alternatively, depending on the person, they might simply not count it because the player doesn't care for it or doesn't enjoy it. Notice how I spent the majority of this discussion talking...
Like, people's personality should not be part of the conversation for... Just like I said about the... Specifically, like, whether or not you like beating Party Finder or not, that should not be considered a skill. Same, it's like, whether or not you enjoy... Like, some people might be good at things that they don't enjoy. Let's not kid ourselves. Some people are good at things that they don't enjoy. Does like whether or not they like rating is just kind of irrelevant. It's not a fair kind of factor in terms of like conversation about difficulty. I don't think people like getting a read on people's fucking personality and whether or not they enjoy the content kind of matters. If we're specifically talking about difficulty, like that conversation can be had about anything else.
Vaguely about, essentially, duty finder content and extremes and savage. There's plenty of other content in the game. Are deep dungeons midcore content? Well, given our previous definitions, you kinda need a pre-made group to do a full run of any deep dungeon, and the difficulty difference between going with a full group and going alone is a whole universe apart. But let's say that Palace of the Dead with a full team is easy. For the sake of example, then maybe it is medium or mid-core difficulty if you're only 2. Jot this one down for later. Then that could be an option. Meanwhile, going alone could probably be considered hardcore difficulty. Regular dungeons are considered very easy, just universally. So what if you didn't bring a tank? Would that make it mid-core? What if you went alone as a tank or a healer? Would that make it mid-core or hardcore? How about doing old extremes or...
This is kind of just arguing cement. Just to clarify, Chad, by the way, I know I might sound a bit angrily when it comes to like discussing this. He is essentially just discussing aspects or theories, essentially. I don't have anything against like specifically what he's talking about. It's just that a lot of these things are just kind of so irrelevant to specifically the conversation of difficulty. What if I started playing with just one hand on my keyboard, right? Like there was a whole clip like with Grubby, who was gonna play against Tyler 1 and Warcraft. They wanted to play a match against each other. And Tyler 1 just literally went like, okay, how about this to make it fair because you are higher skilled than I am. You're gonna play only with one hand. Robbie said okay. And then Tyler went, okay. Your non-dominant hand, also it's gonna be 3v1. I'm gonna get 2 people as well on my team. It's like, fuck, sorry. And then he finished it up, so, we're doing this or what? Or are you pussy? It's like, what the fuck? For some people, that is the difficulty scaling. For some people, that is honestly just kind of a fucking circus, honestly. When we're arguing this many semantics specifically in terms of like, what if. We need a bit, like, feel like if the conversation is specifically about difficulty, it needs to be a bit more rigid and have a bit more clarifications and specifically counted across averages. Maybe that's just me. Maybe I'm a bit like I got a bit over enthusiastic about this conversation. But that's how I feel about this. Because like I've seen casual players that are playing with one fucking arm clear ultimates. They literally are casual. They literally will go clear an ultimate and then just call it for the rest of the tier. They just need one clear just to prove to themselves that they can clear it. Other than that, they're usually role-playing, they're usually hanging out with people, they're usually trying events, they're more social. They participate in the Lalafell parades, you know? They will, if I ask them what kind of raider they are, they will tell me they are a casual player. They enjoy the casual content, but they will still clear ultimate content. And again, they have only one arm.
Or old Savage content at minimum item level without echo or with less than the recommended number of players while still synced. What if you wore less gear deliberately with your team? I could go on and on about examples, but one thing that many of these examples have in common is that you're imposing a challenge on yourself or your team for no extra benefit beyond the challenge. Running Palace of the Dead with 2 players gives the same rewards as doing it with 4. It's just harder and takes longer. Running an old Extreme or Savage synced in any way, shape or form is just a harder, less efficient way to get the same reward you'd get for going in unsynced and booping that big
Rewards as well. I don't believe rewards should be relevant to this. Because some people will do Criterion Savage. They will get shit rewards. They will get their funny fucking material. But, like, the rewards are shit in Criterion. But people do like the challenge. People will challenge themselves in how good their team can clear a Criterion kind of dungeon. They will clear Savage. They will complain about the rewards, but they will still clear it for the challenge. We had a mini world race class expansion for the Criterion dungeon, specifically for the Savage ones. People have done them. They still bitched about the rewards, and I am on their side. The rewards are kind of fucking shit. But people will still clear it. People won the challenge. So the rewards should also be irrelevant in this conversation.
big old dragon on the nose for your reward. The same.
Like, sometimes I will do, like, let's say I have all the totems from a fight. What if I just want to challenge myself on a different job in a fight? Maybe I want to do ultimate as a tank, maybe as a melee. Right? That's what I did with UCOB. I didn't exactly want the totems and the weapons, but I wanted to clear UCOB. But I also decided to do it on an off job. I decided for the memes to cosplay Virgil and go as a samurai. I'm a tank healer main. What the fuck do I know about melee combat?
Kind of logic applies to the idea that content doesn't count if it is something the individual player is not interested in. Often, content can gain an audience simply by offering items players want, which in turn also can mean that content players do want to do can be thrown to the wayside if the reward isn't good enough. Which we saw happen back in Endwalker, when Criterion was considered very interesting content, but a lot of players lost interest super fast because the rewards weren't up to the task. Not really any repeatable reason to do it. In other words, my point is that a way to find midcore content or more reasonably, to adjust the game difficulty of casual content to match the difficulty you desire, you can challenge yourself by approaching the content in unusual ways. However, the problem with that approach is that the reward is unchanged, and so a lot of players do not care for this. On the opposite end, hardcore content can gradually drop in difficulty over time as better equipment becomes available. For example, the first raid tier of Dawntrail will be a lot easier by the time the second raid tier comes out, and way easier by the time the next expansion comes out. The problem there is that the instant the second raid tier of Dawntrail comes out, unless you're there for glamour reasons or just a challenge, the first 3 bosses of the first raid tier instantly become completely pointless in terms of rewards, as most people will simply do the final boss to get the mount, of course on Savage. Not all content is this bad.
He does have a certain point to it. The older content will become easier, but that comes specifically with the stats, because you do passively get better gear by just like, okay, so last expansion's done, Savage tier, it's gonna be easier now, just because by doing story alone, you will get better gear, better than Savage would have given you that tier. But when it comes to like specifically Savage number 1 and Savage number 2, it doesn't mean they're gonna be easier. Some mechanics will be insta-death. Some body checks will fucking destroy a run, no matter if it's unsynced or if you got echo. Like if you have item level, some mechanics will fucking punish you. On Ultimas, okay, Ultimas is not a fair comparison. There will always be synced, right? But Savage specifically, it's like some mechanics will insta-kill you. It doesn't matter. Some mechanics will destroy an entire pool. Like, there's a reason, like, Sunrise is such a shit mechanic. It is literally the second to last mechanic in M4S. And it's so janky, it's so tweaky. Until you are confident with that mechanic, it's gonna take such a long fucking while. And it's like the jank will, like, one person dies, you're fucked. You're fucked. You're about to lose more people because that vuln that some people might get from the laser or just like you most likely will, like, if one person dies, chances are 2 people will die because of how that mechanic is set. 2 people will die. By the time you will res 1 or 2 of them, chances are the next Sunrise is about to fucking kill another 2 people or 4 even. Some mechanics are very punishable these days, which is like, honestly, thank fuck. It's gonna raise a generation of better fucking raiders. But it's not always easier, unfortunately. Unfortunately, sometimes you cannot DPS through the fight just because you have a higher item level. Sometimes you're gonna have to do some mechanics. And some mechanics are just so fucking punishing.
About this. For example, the first 2 extremes of Dawntrail still have their mounts to be collected. But the point here is that you could simply wait for hard content to drop in difficulty until it reaches a point where it feels beatable for you. Whether that's Midcore.
Oh, let's be fucking honest here. The speed ice phase bridges are still gonna be memed on. Even at the end of the expansion. I fucking promise you. On Everkeep, if someone doesn't know how to do certain panels, if they, like, certain mechanics will fucking send you off of the platform. Or, like, maybe actually no, Everkeep isn't that difficult. Valigarmanda might fucking kill some people if you're not respecting certain things. So is Sphene. Sphene, like, on Extreme will, like, people still, like, it's technically the fight is already on farm. But people are still memeing the ice bridges so much. Hell, I'll sometimes fucking meme that bridge, depending what job I am, just by muscle memory. So not exactly a fair assumption. Same with, like, on Endsinger. Endsinger will still punish people if they don't know the mechanics, specifically the planet mechanics. They will knock you away or just kill you if you are not capable of, well, not capable of resolving, but, like, if you don't have your fucking eyes open, honestly. If we're being completely fucking honest. If you don't have your eyes fucking opened, chances are you will be blown off the arena.
Or something else. In fact, I've already heard players refer to the two first extremes of Dawn.
So to be fair, he does have a good point in terms of like it being easier content. People can go unsynced and essentially just DPS fast enough before any problems actually become problems. If you have high enough DPS. I am kind of agreeing and disagreeing in that regard. Though to be fair, I'm not even agreeing disagreeing. I'm just kind of encouraging a more in-depth kind of conversation on certain aspects here.
Trail as Midcore. What makes this interesting to me is that you still need to make a pre-made group to overcome these, and they still have the capacity to wipe you if, like, 2 or maybe 3 players make one mistake at just the wrong time. And while the fight would be a lot shorter, and the kinds of mistakes that could cause a wipe would be much fewer by then, these bosses would still be able to wipe you in an instant by the next expansion. Technically, with the release of a Chaotic Alliance raid, some players expressed hope that this content would finally be the sought-after Midcore content. However, unless some absolute miracle happened, Chaotic Alliance raids satisfy all of the requirements I talked about previously in this discussion for players to not call it Midcore, I think. We knew that before the content was released. In fairness, I also heard people express the same hope for Variant and Criterion dungeons, as well as sometimes referring to content like Eureka or Boja as Midcore content, typically referring to that in the context of
the content itself, I think it's midcore. I agree in that regard in terms of like I think Eureka or Baja can be considered midcore. Because it's open world content with multiple with a whole gaggle of mechanics depending to fate. Like if you need to kill these fates, you need to kill some of these bosses, you need to queue up for some of these instances. By the way, in the background, guess what what the fuck I'm doing? Haha, I'm in Baja. I do think it should be considered midcore content. But I don't believe the raids specifically, maybe some of the raids, specifically the normal, non-savage ones, can be considered midcore. But the savage is gonna be hardcore, unfortunately. Sorry, high-end.
wanting more of it, which we will get soon. It does make it sound like it isn't about midcore, but more about, I don't know if grindable content or quote-unquote content for me makes more sense, but I think the first one sounds more accurate to the kind of content that is often suspected of being midcore content, whether it succeeds or not. Grindable content. Finally, I just want to comment on
I kind of agree in terms of grindable content. Some content should be considered. Actually, that is a very good point. Midcore should be considered specifically grindable content. If you cannot clear it like through skill-based or anything else, you should be able to grind something out that will help you or give you an advantage to actually lower the difficulty by a large margin. Baja should count that. Because you can exchange your metal for, you know, these Valor buffs that increase, like, your tank healing and... sorry, your defense, your healing, and DPS by, like, huge fucking margins. That should be considered midcore, I think. Same with any of the, like, items that you can get. Like, some of the items will make certain jobs absolutely fucking busted.
two things. The first one is that some of you may have thought while I outlined the different reasons, hey, but in the JP region, it is a lot more normal to use the duty finder for hard content. I've been told.
Okay. Let's not compare ourselves to JP. JP have absolutely different standards. You can queue up in Duty Finder, but that's because they don't make Party Finder groups. They queue up, they do the content. They also got macros. An A. They got macros. They have strategies, specifically region-based ones. But they're also really fucking polite in certain regard. When I say, like, polite, I mean, like, they will do, let's say, 5 pulls. They will do, like, 5 pulls if it's a wipe or someone doesn't feel like this can go on. But like after 5 pulls, they will literally just politely say goodbye and rick you again. That's similar to us hopping party finders if we don't like what we see. Only they have put a lot less effort into it. They don't have to sort out an entire party finding group for it. So I'd probably not consider like I would not compare us to JP. JP have a bit different standards, and not because they're essentially, you know, the whole meme that JP players are better than you. They probably are, honestly, depending. But their culture of difficulty is a lot different. Like, we have data center travel to the Japanese servers right now. We do, for some baffling fucking reason. We do. But nobody goes there because honestly, the cultural shock is just it ain't a good thing. It ain't healthy. Like a lot of us were scared of data center travel specifically to JP from Europe or NA because everyone when they were talking about specifically data center travel, they meant Europe servers and they meant NA servers. Nobody in their fucking mind meant I want to go to JP from Europe. Maybe some people that want to try raiding there, but it's not the majority of people.
Told that in the JP region, it is generally normal to queue using the duty finder, content finder in the JP version for re-clears, and that it is still normal to make proper pre-made groups for learning and progging. Another factor here is that socially, apparently, most Japanese individuals have this pressure and so desire to not be a burden on the team. I've been told the phrase that goes with this is meiwaku o kaketakunai, where meiwaku means burden, and I believe the sentence means something to the effect of not wanting to become a burden or not wanting to cause any trouble. Because of...
I mean, that's most people who are scared of Party Finder. Like, their number one reason for not joining Party Finder is because they don't want to be a burden or mess up or get kicked for being bad, like worse than others at the game, because they don't have the perspective of what skill levels in Party Finder. Usually it's a lot lower than people think. So in that regard, we're not that different in terms of from JP, because nobody wants to be a burden to their team, and everyone plays this game to win. So I guess there is a difference that the JP players will essentially just are a bit more determined to work on improving, not be do not be a sandbag.
This greater expectation of doing your part and not wanting to be a meiwaku, it can be safer for these players to assume no one's going to queue in the content finder without having done their homework. The other thing I wanted to comment on is that I recognize that there are many players, absolutely, that will challenge themselves to do content in Final Fantasy XIV in weird ways to make their own challenges. Whether the challenge is to run a duty in a harder way than normal, with less gear than normal, with less players than normal, or even to run it faster than normal, making things more dangerous as a result. There are many ways to challenge ourselves in the game, and sometimes what the game requires is that we take a step in the direction we need ourselves, instead of every time the game gives us a new kind of content, we instantly toss it in the casual or hardcore bucket and ask for more midcore content. In fact, in preparation for this discussion video, I looked into the meaning of medium core and midcore, and aside from Final Fantasy XIV discussions on the subject, the main things I found were other games that discussed it because the game itself had a difficulty called medium core, Terraria for instance, or it was used to discuss overarching game design, not content, the entire game. So maybe the mid-core or medium core that some of us...
Might be just my opinion, but I think that kind of difficulty should specifically be considered on a game-to-game basis. Like someone who is not good at shooters would be at MMOs. Difficulty should be differently, like it should be compared a bit differently. in some regards. Like in some games, their higher difficulty is a lot fucking higher than the hard difficulty in another. Like for example, okay, this might sound like I'm taking jabs, but I promise you this comes from a bit from experience. My last mythic tier in World of Warcraft was Battle for Dazar'alor back in BFA. That was the last mythic tier I cleared. I cleared multiple mythic tiers. I've done charity runs with mythic, but ultimates are still harder. The ultimate raids are gonna be a lot harder than mythic raids in World of Warcraft. In my opinion. in my opinion, honestly. Some people might agree or disagree depending on their experience, but in my opinion, a mythic raider would have more difficulty specifically doing ultimate raids if they came just from mythic raids.
Seek is a myth. And the real problem is that many of us have grown in skill over the years to such a degree that it feels like the content that used to be exactly for you or me suddenly is too easy, without anything actually changing that much, aside from our skill levels and preferences. But what do you think? Maybe you watched this whole discussion thinking, well, I know what Midcore is, and it is precisely this. Or maybe you got inspired to try the game in an unusual way to challenge yourself. I would especially love to hear about how you challenge yourself in Final Fantasy XIV, or maybe even in a different game. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively
I think this was a good video. Obviously, he didn't specifically give his point of view, so I want people to understand I'm not exactly just having a go at him or arguing with him. He is bringing up certain points that I would argue with, and I do like that this brings up a very healthy discussion, a very good and healthy discussion about this whole conversation. The only time when I believe we're gonna know whether or not we have midcore content is when we're gonna have enough content in between, specifically casual and hardcore. Sorry, high-end. I keep fucking saying hardcore. Hardcore is the way you treat content and not specifically difficult. So, the moment we have more midcore content that can be considered between casual and between high-end, is when we're gonna have a better idea about midcore. But unfortunately, we can guess as much as we want. Unfortunately, there's nothing that can be essentially considered midcore. Well, there's some content, but it's just there's not enough of it for us to make an average kind of, or like a statistical understanding, or specifically statistical kind of like definition. If this can be considered midcore content in Final Fantasy XIV terms. Like, for example, in World of Warcraft, normal raids, those are midcore content. Casuals do them, casuals clear them. It takes them time, but they can prog them. Heroic, not my hardcore. Mythic, hardcore. LFR, the highest fucking difficulty, because people are fucking terrorists in that difficulty. But when it comes to specifically Final Fantasy XIV, unfortunately, we need more midcore content. We need more fucking content in between casual and high-end. As much as I'm one of the people who is begging for 3 ultimates per expansion, I would rather have two operational content. I would rather have 2 Bajjas per expansion, if I'm being completely honest, than ultimates. Just because I would like to be a bit more busy. I would like to keep myself a bit more busy during the expansion, rather than just prog a fight and then get bored. It encourages a very healthy and good conversation.